Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever in the world you're joining us today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio. I'm the coordinator of CIFAL York Operations. I would like to officially open the sixth and final session of our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Disaster and Emergency Management speaker series with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speakers, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to the webinar. With more than 330 registered for this speaker series, we're very glad to say that this series has been well received by the academic and professional colleagues from around the world. Today's session is the sixth and final session of the series. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Sonia Singh. Sonia is an emergency management and public health professional with over 27 years of experience working in the public sector at the municipal, regional, provincial, and federal levels. Currently, Sonia is working for Markham Fire and Emergency Services, managing the emergency management and business continuity programs for the city of Markham. She has held this position for over the past 12 years, and in her spare time, she is an online instructor for the Disaster and Emergency Management Program at the Northern Alberta Institute for Technology. Sonia, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Francesco. I first of all want to congratulate you and Ali for this program. Being the last of the 6 sessions that you ran, I think it's actually timely, and all the speakers were fantastic, and I honestly applaud CIFAL York for presenting this, and I hope the work continues. Without further ado, let's introduce our first speaker. This is Brandy Mai, and she's an attorney, emergency management consultant, and trainer who has worked extensively in communications, public information, helping multiple organizations and agencies navigate their crisis and disaster strategies. Her education includes Juris Doctor from Mitchell Hamline School of Law, graduate coursework in strategic communications from Purdue University, a Bachelor of Journalism from Northwestern State University, military public affairs training at the Defense Information School, certification as an emergency manager from the state of Georgia, and qualifications as a civil and domestic mediator. Brandy is a U.S. Army veteran who was born and raised in the Deep South, Louisiana, and she has 4 kids and resides in Savannah, Georgia. She is a survivor of military sexual trauma and subsequent post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. And in addition to that, Brandy has a diagnosis of ADHD, and Brandy is also autistic. So in her spare time, she serves as a guardian ad litem for children in the Chatham County, Georgia courts, the board chair for the South Fulton Mediation Center, and a member of the Trust Network working on national initiatives for overcoming conflict through mediation, and advocate for veterans, children, and disabled persons. I think from your personal experience and your work experience, your topic is so relevant, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So go ahead, Brandy.
Thanks a lot, Sonia. I apologize that I gave you the long bio. I should have given you like the 2-sentence bio.
You know what? It's important. It's important to know because you're speaking about neurodiversity and you live it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're located. Thank you for attending today or for watching at home later. As Sonia said, my name is Brandy Mai. I am an emergency manager and attorney. So thanks to Francesco, he's going to run the slides for me because we had some technical difficulties prior to logging in today. So thank you for bearing with us. As you all know, the title here and the obligatory first slide is Neurodivergence Considerations in Disaster Operations. And I want to say something quickly here. considerations is not an obligatory word. I've heard the word issues. I've heard the word considerations. I heard it as a topic. There's lots of words that can be put right there. But basically, this is just things to consider about neurodivergent persons that might be working with you or living in your communities. Next slide for me, Francesco. Before I get started, for accessibility and accommodations, if there's any accessibility or accommodation needs from participants, please message the moderator or Francesco. And my name and information is at the bottom of the slides. If you notice any ways where I can make this presentation more accessible to future audiences or right now, please bring it to my attention. I am open. I'm always learning. So I welcome any feedback. Next slide for me, please, Francesco. Also, before we get started, I want to lay out some trigger warnings. There will be ableist language. As I tell this story, there will be discussions about toxic work environments, discussions about burnout, hospitalizations, and there is one photograph of an IV and medical treatment. Next slide for me, please. And like any good lawyer, I'm going to add some disclaimers first. I want to make it very clear that what I'm discussing today is my experience. I am not speaking on behalf of all neurodivergent persons. This is my experience. This is my story. And also, life is complex. This presentation is, 20 to 30 minutes, and it's a snapshot version of a much more complicated story that I'm always happy to tell, but I ask not to make any inferences. Lots of exceptions apply, and nothing in these slides should be construed as legal advice. Next slide, please, for me. So as I previously stated, this is my story. It's not a typical, let me teach you, let me, impart doctrine to you. This is my story. So it's not a typical presentation. It's my story as a neurodiverse emergency manager and disaster survivor. My career began as an Army journalist, then went into PR, crisis PR, and then emergency management. I've long held that the EM industry, what it's missing is the stories. Most emergency managers, if not all, they want genuinely to help people. But sometimes in their efforts to save the forest, no fire department pun intended, they miss the stories of the trees. And I think it's important that stories are told, and that's what I want to do here today. So if you'll go to the next slide for me, Francesco, that'd be great. There again is the obligatory bio, which Sonia has already synthesized and wrapped up for us. My pronouns are she, her, and that's the bullet point that I probably should have given to Sonia ahead of time that would have made the intro a little quicker. But this is who I am. There's lots of stuff on there. This is me professionally, but me as a person is what we're about to get into. Next slide for me, please. So when you hear, and I can't see you on the screen, all of you, but I'm talking to you. When you hear the words autism, autistic, ADHD, or CPTSD, what traits pop into your head? What images, words, anything that pops into your head? If you had a coworker with these diagnoses and you knew about it, but you hadn't met them yet, what would you think about them? Would you hire them? Would you want to work with them if you only knew their diagnoses, but didn't know anything else about them? Next slide for me, please. Typically, when you hear those words or those diagnoses of autistic, ADHD, PTSD, the little word clouds that are in front of you right now with the negative words and the negative connotation is what typically pops into people's head. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes it does mine too, and I have the diagnoses. So if the negative traits and connotations were the first things to cross your mind, you're not a bad person at all. It is perfectly normal because we all have inherent biases, and there is systemic ableism incorporated and embedded into our societies. So thinking the negative thoughts about those diagnoses, and just the fact that there is a medical diagnosis, usually something negative is going to pop up. So you're not a bad person at all. However, I do ask that you recognize that there's an inherent bias there, and that systemic ableism is what is at play kind of behind the scenes that causes that inherent bias. Francesco, next slide for me, please. Thank you. So next question for you. If a person has autism, ADHD, and or CPTSD or PTSD, what do they look like? What images pop into your head? Do they have a look? Do they have mannerisms? Next slide for me, please. That is what they look like. It looks like me. It looks like the person that is teaching and presenting today. It looks like the person with all of the credentials that Sonia just laid out. It looks like me. There's not a look. There's not a certain trait that applies to everybody. For all intents and purposes, I look fairly normal. I look like anybody's coworker in any EOC or SOC that exists, I hope. Next slide for me, please. I like to always say that neurodivergent traits can be superpowers. There were a lot of words on the previous slides that were negative. And those are the things that are usually discussed when neurodivergence and those words come up. However, there are very specific traits to neurodivergence that I like to call them superpowers. Yes, we're very different from neurotypicals, but these superpowers, as I like to call them, they're very helpful in disaster operations. For instance, we notice very small details and changes in patterns. We have great memory. We like to plan very carefully. Who doesn't need a good, careful planner, right? We love having a purpose or a mission. We have a heightened sense of justice. We don't like to wait, which is good because response activities can usually be pretty fast paced. We have little fear of danger, and we're very hypervigilant. We kind of have, I tell my kids, we have spidey senses that some neurotypicals might not have. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, and this is my experience. These are ones that I have that many neurotypicals share with me. Next slide for me, please. But these superpowers cannot always be seen, and neither can neurodivergence itself. I have never been able to see these 3D magic eye posters that came out when I was in middle school. Allegedly, this one has a T-Rex in it, but if it has something profane, somebody please tell me. I did double check to make sure this one was good and accurate for this slide. But neurodivergence is a lot like those magic eye posters where you can't see it unless somebody tells you they have it and tells you what to look for. And that's what I want to do in the next couple of slides is I want to take those pictures that I just showed you, and I want to put a magic eye lens over the top of it and kind of show you a few things that you might not see. Next slide for me, please. So in all of these pictures, I'm in all of them. There's only one out of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 photos where I am genuinely comfortable and in my element and at peace. Now I'm smiling, I look happy, everything looks normal, but there's a 3D magic eye poster here in these photos that I can see because I know what I was going through at the time. Next slide for me, please. So there's a term in the neurodivergent community and also in other diagnoses called masking. Masking means to conceal something from view, and it means also to cover so as to protect from a process or to protect in general. It's also called compensating, and it is a very complex strategy that most neurodivergents have learned for survival purposes, for social survival purposes, that we've learned since we've been young. We didn't know we were learning it. We didn't really know we were doing it when we were younger, but it's embedded in our very core. It's what we do. But this masking, basically meaning that we are not able to be our authentic, true selves and use our superpowers, can lead to serious health consequences, including anxiety, depression, exhaustion, loss of identity, suicidal ideations and thoughts. And that complex survival skill really is a protective mechanism that keeps us from being outed or harassed because we're different. I can tell you from my personal experience, if somebody asks me, who are you? Really, I'm a combination of every person I've ever met who has a character trait that I like, that I've just picked up and I've adopted. So I don't always know who I am because I'm always masking, and really I'm mirroring other people. Next slide for me, please. All right, so this photo, which again was in the main slide, this was at a winter weather media panel a few years ago. And I'm smiling. I look happy. I'm there with my colleagues. This was over at Georgia Power, I believe, in Atlanta. And in that moment, I recall wishing that I had a quiet, dark place to decompress, a place to take a break. We had been there for multiple hours. Coffee and water was provided. I don't drink coffee and usually prefer super cold water. There were lots of lights, lots of television. That was a very, very high sensory overload experience for me. And so in that picture, while I look happy, the magic 3D eye poster, truthfully, I was very, very uncomfortable. Next slide for me. And another one. Couldn't see it. It looks like an average photograph, right, of somebody taking selfies or group pictures. That was a functional exercise several years ago. There were many bright lights. There was a very large open space with a lot of people in it, which meant echoes, inconsistent temperatures. So you'll see that I'm the only one there wearing a jacket. And I don't wear glasses. I don't have a prescription for glasses, but I have on my blue light blockers and my glare resistant glasses. And the reason for that is I was doing anything I could to reduce the sensory input that was happening at that location. Next slide for me. And another one. This was in our state operations center, bright lights, of course, no windows because it's an operations center. Lots of people, lots of noise, no decompression room, no quiet room, nor could I escape and go outside and take a quick walk around the block. And in that photo, you'll notice my hair's wet. I'm not wearing any makeup. My shirt's untucked and I'm wearing wrinkle-free pants. Now, look, we're all in the public safety realm. We all go for what's quick and easy. But for me, I see in that photo that I had to make a choice that day between being neurotypically presentable or just getting to work. I was out of energy during that activation. And the next slide for me, please. But here, this is the one of the 5 where I was better in my element. And the reason why is I had more autonomy and I was trusted to be in control of my environment. I could, post instructing, usually you get a break every 50 minutes. I'm not in the crowd, I'm in front of the crowd. I'm closer to my exits. There's fewer people surrounding me and there's not as much noise. And I had that control of my environment and I was trusted to handle it accordingly. So I know that we previously discussed that neurodivergence has superpowers or can be superpowers. But next slide for me, please. Without accessible, inclusive environments, superpowers are also kryptonite. They're very, very harmful. These 2 photos of me were taken 1 or 2 days after the Hurricane Michael activation, which was, I believe, a few weeks long. And, having to operate in a neurotypical environment, stress of EM is hard enough and fast enough. But then you add that extra component of having to operate in neurotypical ways and mask for weeks on end. my body collapsed. My body failed. I was hospitalized. I lost 20 to 30 pounds in just a few weeks. I had lots of medical conditions that flared. And I also had serious compassion fatigue and helplessness. That sense of justice that I have, that extraordinary sense of justice, I just felt like I should have done more, could have done more. And it really took a toll on my mental and physical health. Within 3 to 4 months of these photos, I had resigned from being the state public information officer for the State Emergency Management Agency. Next slide for me, please. So as an Army veteran, you know, it is said that, you know, a veteran signs a blank check, you know, up to and willing to die for their country, or a blank check, you know, up to the cost of their life. And for me, I've always been willing to die for my country or my fellow man, but I didn't expect emergency management and that environment, that non-inclusive, non-accessible environment, to be the one that pulled the trigger. The profession was killing me. It was not built for my neurodivergence. It was not inclusive. It was not accessible. And I did not have the autonomy or the trust to have little control, just little control over my environment enough so that I could conserve energy. And at that point, I knew that I wanted to change the rules. I didn't really know how, but I knew that I wanted to affect change in a positive way. I also knew that in order to change the rules, I had to know the rules. I had to know the rules of the system that I was operating in. And in order to truly know those rules, I had to learn them from the source. So next slide, please. I joined the largest, most influential, cis, middle-aged, ableist white man club I could think of, the legal profession. And in 2018, well, I apologize, in 2019, I left the state agency, went into consulting, and I went into law school so that I could learn from the people that have always made the rules. I could learn from the law. I could learn the boundaries, the framework, the rights that I had as a disabled person to level the playing field. So off I went to learn so that I could make change. Next slide for me, please. And this is a little bit more of, I devoted 5 years, the most recent 5 years, to getting a law license so I could make this profession better. I could be trustworthy enough for my colleagues to take me seriously so that I could have the autonomy I needed to protect my health, and so that I could be a voice for others who may not be able to or be unwilling to speak for themselves. So now that I'm all verified and vetted according to the degree that hangs on my wall now, next slide, please. How can we collectively, myself and you who are listening and our colleagues, how can we make emergency management more accessible and inclusive to neurodivergence? If any of you are on Instagram or TikTok, there's a little background audio where it says kind of like, they're not going to know, they're going to know. But how will they know? They're not going to know. So that might sound familiar to you. And I will say that neurodivergent and disabled persons, we know, we can tell when an environment is inclusive or accessible to us or not. We know. So as emergency managers, here's the things that I was kind of looking for, or I do look for whenever I'm working on a job or a job site. Is there a quiet room? Is there a decompression space? Do people require things to be done the way it's always been? Is there accessibility? Are they goals? Or are they some endpoint? Or is that the starting point for an organization? Are things provided for team members without them having to ask, or made very simply for them to obtain? Can employees take breaks or step away so that they have bodily autonomy to conserve their energy and to control their environment? And this also translates to our stakeholders in the community. Community members can tell whether your organization is inclusive or not, even though they're on the outside looking in. They can see it, or they can tell just through language and public information efforts. They can tell whether your language and ASL interpreters helped to create the message, or if they were just there to translate it from English. English in America, or whatever the common primary language is where you are? Are the stakeholders helping to make the decisions, or are they just providing input for the sake of due diligence in your access and functional needs annex? Another good way to tell, are your sheltering operations, do they have noise canceling headphones? Do they have quiet spaces? You know, are there considerations for neurodivergent persons in, you know, mass evacuation and sheltering operations? Those things we notice. Next slide for me, please. So I'm going to wrap this up and hand it over to Sonia and Dr. Rodric Bowman. But here on this last slide, how can we make it more inclusive and accessible? Level the playing field. We don't need or want extraordinary things. We just want inclusion and accessibility to be the starting point and not the end goal. So 3 takeaways from here are ABC. Acknowledge that neurodivergent exists and that it creates the systemic ableism creates inherent biases. So from here on out, if you hear the words autistic, PTSD, ADHD, I invite you to think of me, your colleague, who went and got a whole law degree so that the industry would pay attention to me screaming that I needed help. But think of me and not the negative words that we saw in the previous word clouds. B, bring your stakeholders to the table for decision-making and operations, not just to check a box for due diligence. And C, create accessible, inclusive environments filled with autonomy and trust. And I have a typo on that slide I will fix. Emergency management should not unnecessarily traumatize, re-traumatize, or burn out neurodivergent persons. Disasters and crisis are high stress enough. They're traumatizing enough. There's no need to add an extra layer to that unnecessarily. And try not to make the most marginalized among us go and get entire degrees or have to scream from the rooftop just to be heard. And then the last slide, I'll just leave up kind of as I'm closing off the cuff. As far as resources that might be available to you after this, Dawn Brantley, who is, I believe, at Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, she has created the Inclusive EM Community. And that is a great resource for asking questions, meeting with others that may be neurodiverse. And it's way more than just neurodiversity. It's a very great place for us to have these conversations that are safe. And I'm always happy to mentor or to answer any questions that anyone may have. My story is an open book, and I'm always happy to tell it. And so thank you again for letting me be here today. Sonia, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Brandy. I have to say I appreciate the personal perspective. And by you providing your story, I think it just adds to the relevance of what we do. And there were so many points where it was like, yeah, that's me too. And just recognizing that. There is a question, so I just want to make sure we cover that. And then we'll do a little wrap up and get Dr. Bowman in for his session too. So there's a first question here. I've met so many fellow ADHDs and others on the spectrum. Sorry, I'm not getting the whole thing. In public safety, that it's almost the norm. And it's true. So even when you started to talk about the superpowers of neurodivergence, it was like, yeah, that's everybody in the EOC basically. Anyway, this person, Rick, says, you'd think we'd figure out how to manage our environment and pace to accommodate our needs. How would you redesign an EOC and the planning P to fit who we are? Even if that's possible, even if it's possible.
Sure. Well, that would take a lot more than a few minutes in a Q&A, but I think what immediately comes to mind is having quiet decompression spaces, having spaces where, you know, even just a kitchen where people most do, but, you know, can keep their things, you know, that are their comfort foods or their comfort items. And I think just recognizing the sensory inputs in an EOC, I think people just realizing like there's really fluorescent bright lights in here and there's no windows and everybody's kind of closed in. And I think once more people start recognizing that when they're designing EOCs, whether that's leadership or whether that's design persons, I think we'll start to see it implemented more. Until then, I think changing a few light bulbs, having a quiet room off to the side, and not have, for the leaders, not having this mindset of you need to be at this desk, at this table in these amount of times, like making performance-based metrics as opposed to butt-in-seat based metrics, I think would really be a good start for the profession.
Thank you. There are a few other questions, and I was wondering if you could probably go on the question and answer, and you could probably type in your responses for them so that we could move on to Dr. Bowman's presentation. And at the end, we could probably bring it back if there's something you want to discuss, both of you. Okay.
Sure, thank
you. Just to move forward, again, thank you so much, Brandy, for your presentation. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Rodric Bowman. He's a seasoned emergency manager who holds a bachelor's degree in public health from Western Connecticut State University, a master's in administrative science degree focused in emergency management from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a doctorate in civil security, leadership management, and policy from New Jersey City University, where his dissertation explored the value of public-private partnerships focused on resiliency and the impact that these partnerships have on the emergency manager's ability to prevent, mitigate, and recover from potential disasters. Dr. Bowman served as a regional disaster officer for the American Red Cross New Jersey region, where he oversaw the Disaster Cycle Services Program, which focused on addressing preparedness, response, recovery needs for clients. Dr. Bowman worked as the Senior Director for Emergency Management Operations at New York City Health Plus Hospitals. He provided strategic guidance and tactical support to ensure the uninterrupted functionality of system-wide operations for the nation's most extensive municipal healthcare delivery system. Before his role at NYC Health Plus and hospitals, Dr. Bowman served the state of New Jersey as the Deputy Chief of the Preparedness Bureau of the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. And I'd just like to welcome Dr. Bowman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sonia. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that's joining us today. First, I want to just pause and just thank Brandy for her presentation, and certainly opened my eyes on some issues and things that I weren't aware of, you know, in the past. And certainly you are truly a soldier, Brandy, and you know, I think I have a new role model moving forward. So thank you for that. Today I'm going to speak a little bit about. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, and emergency management, and try to drill down a little bit on emergency management programs and our practices. So this is really going to be, you know, highlight. I'm going to be brief. I would like to spend some time on questions and answers, if possible, as we move through today. So we already talked a little bit about my background, but basically, you know, I started my career a little over 20 plus years ago, in public health, working as a disease investigator, really working with some of the most vulnerable at-risk populations in a large southern city here in the U.S. From there, my career really just kind of morphed into public health preparedness. Then, you know, taking on more responsibility, you know, around emergency management, program development, volunteer management, and the like, and to ultimately, you know, to what I'm doing right now, working as an emergency management consultant, college professor, teaching risk management and emergency management at a number of universities, and performing various research. So my research areas really focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and community resilience, and how do we really serve those underserved and vulnerable and marginalized populations. So there's no surprise that DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, is certainly a priority for many organizations, and really for good reason. Good reasons. There's growing data that really support the improved productivity, efficiency of diverse organizations, and really what a diverse workforce brings to bear with any organization: increased creativity, enhanced collaboration, and the list really goes on and on. So for today in our discussion, as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're talking about those three things as it relates to community access, personal attitudes, choices that are made, partnerships that are built, our communication internally and externally with our constituents as emergency managers, our ability to develop, appropriate policies and policies that are inclusive and ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion are included in the way that we do business as emergency managers, right? So looking at diversity, and that's diversity of more than just, race, gender, sexuality, disability, but really, diversity of thought, right? People bring different perspectives based on their various worldviews, right? And their experiences that really, form who they are and their ideas and their perspectives, right? So it's important to have all types of input and perspectives within any organization, really to be productive, to be efficient, and to really achieve that agency's mission. Equity again in terms of policy and practice, and ensuring that that there's fairness across the board, and inclusion, just ensuring that everyone has a voice. Everyone in the organization has a voice, has the opportunity to speak up, and their voice is valued, and their input is valued as well. So to break down some of these terms, right? So diversity really means the presence of differences giving in a given setting, like race, gender, sometimes ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, etc. It's the presence of differences that may include all those things that I just mentioned, but can also include the differences, again, as I mentioned earlier, in perspectives, different in political perspectives, and really, that entire worldview that, folks bring, that they carry with them everywhere they go. When we speak of equity is really that approach to ensure that everyone has access, right? That, it promotes justice, impartiality, fairness within, procedures, policies. And when we're looking at emergency management, it also includes distribution of resources, whether that is, financial resources, post-disaster, if it's, resources in terms of personnel, to help with the planning. The planning process is, really all phases of emergency management. And inclusion really is outcome driven, right? Inclusion is that outcome to ensure that, those that are diverse have a feeling of being welcome, right? And inclusion happens when programs are truly inviting to all. So inclusion really addresses people with different identities, feeling or being valued within an organization, and being able to navigate and feel invited and included overall. So why is DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, important in emergency management programs and practices? Well, for all the same reasons that DE&I is important for any other organization, right? We talked about diversity in thought, increased productivity, enhanced creativity, enhanced collaboration among partners and peers, right? Those things are truly important as we look at building successful emergency management programs and strengthening community resilience. So today we're going to really cover three areas when we discuss DE&I and its importance, in emergency management: workforce diversity, equitable service delivery, and stakeholder inclusivity. So, workforce diversity in emergency management. So, in 2019, there was U.S. national statistics showing that about 12% of emergency management directors are persons of color. Within that, more than 62% of emergency management directors are male, and 71% of that group are white. So it's historically been a predominantly white man's profession, which understandably so. If you look at the history of emergency management and you look at you look at where those leaders and those workers in the field have come from, many have come from the military, right? At a time where leadership in the military, again, predominantly white. Many come from the fire service and police, which have also seen really the same type of demographics in police, fire, in the military, transitioning over to emergency management, right? What is promising, though, more data from 2016 shows that representation of emergency management directors was about 86% white, 5% Black, and nominal representation among Asians and other Hispanic populations, right? So between 2016 and 2019, we've seen some growth, at least at the leadership level. Just to add on to that, those average salaries in 2019 for white male emergency managers were approximately $95,000, but for their female counterparts doing the exact same job was just over $53,000, right? So lack of diversity, and certainly looking at those pay scales, a lack of equity. But the good news is that our field, our profession continues to evolve. It continues to grow. Awareness continues to rise around this great profession. Anecdotally, I just spent a week at the International Association of Emergency Managers Conference that was just held in Savannah, Georgia. And there was a time that I would walk into a room and I would be the only person of color, at a conference or at a meeting, even at the local level. And very scarcely saw women, in this profession and in this field. But what's promising is that it continues to grow. We see that there's a number of academic programs, focused in emergency management, and those programs are growing. Those programs are, being promoted to a broader, the net is being cast broader, right? So these programs are being promoted to a greater group of potential students. There's so much going on in emergency management right now, and ongoing efforts to raise awareness in emergency management are continuing to grow. Some of the challenges, that we certainly see in emergency management programs, are just like any other agency or organization, would face the same types of challenges, right? Dealing with unconscious bias, being able to eliminate microaggressions, ensuring that there are diverse boards and diverse senior leadership, mid management, and that there's really diversity at every level of within the organization. And we are really beginning to start to see that really happen in emergency management. In terms of equitable service delivery. There's no need to hide that, you know, disasters do disproportionately affect underserved communities and people of color more. Why is that? Well, in the US, you know, we have a long legacy of discriminatory housing and economic practices. Even to this day, bias can potentially impact how emergency management programs are implemented, especially for underserved areas and marginalized groups. Those combined impacts of legacy land use and financing policies, such as redlining, for example, has certainly marginalized communities, both politically, economically, even structurally, being that, you know, folks are now at an increased risk of exposure to, you know, climate change, disasters, and so forth, right? And those folks continue to be left with fewer local resources and capacities to either mitigate those risks or really fully recover in the aftermath of a disaster event, if they're able to recover at all. The bottom line is that those at risk tend to be less likely to have the resources necessary to prepare for a disaster in the first place. And many lack the savings and other resources needed after disaster strikes to help support their recovery. So inequities in disaster response have also been reflected through and seen and criticized through various in the U.S. federal aid programs, right? Disaster funding, individual assistance, you know, a FEMA program that is heavily weighted towards property owners. And because home ownership tends to be higher among whites than Blacks and other minorities, that program in itself exacerbates inequity. Another promising glimmer of hope there, though, is that these things are recognized, right? So DHS and FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, both have made commitments to reduce social inequities in their mission and in their practice, right? So it's very promising, the landscape right now of DE&I in emergency management. The third point that I want to talk about was stakeholder inclusivity. It was mentioned earlier that, you know, my dissertation was focused on public-private partnerships, and that was for a reason, right? In emergency management, you know, things get done through partnerships, right? So when we're looking at developing, you know, partnerships and including our stakeholders in all phases of emergency management, the planning, the response, the mitigation, the recovery, it's important to, you know, have connectivity with diverse stakeholders, diverse populations of communities, volunteer organizations, faith-based organizations, private sector corporations, really the gambit. And as an emergency manager, as you're looking at building partnerships, you really have to think outside of the box, and you really have to look at your community and get input from, you know, those key stakeholders in your community on, you know, the types of partnerships and the types of other organizations and agencies that can certainly help in emergency management and be part of the overarching emergency management team. As a partner, as a stakeholder, right? So as emergency managers, it's critical for us to look at every avenue in terms of partnerships, because we really don't know, you know, what those partners, you know, can bring to bear, right? So we want to uncover that. We want to find out what various stakeholders in our community, you know, their input, their feedback on our emergency management programs, how we're doing, you know, how we're doing as emergency managers, kind of you know, kind of like a status check, you know, of you know, where we're going and how we're doing. So those are the three critical things that I've noticed, that I've highlighted in terms of the need in emergency management as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how do we get there? You know, we've come a long way since really the inception of emergency management as a profession, right? We've moved, you know, from the profession being a solely white male, you know, profession to seeing more diversity in race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, within the profession, and that continues to grow and it continues to gain momentum, and it's something that we certainly need to stay on top of. But what do we do to get where we need to be? The first thing is to start with raising awareness as emergency management as a career choice. I'm certainly an advocate as a professor of the profession, as a practitioner in the field. Every opportunity that I get, that I meet a young person that's considering you know, a career path, I certainly, you know, especially those that, you know, raise their hand and say, you know, I want to work in public safety, I want to work in law enforcement and fire service. Emergency management is one of those career paths that, you know, unless you're really in the mix, you may not know that this career path really exists, right? So it's up to us as emergency managers to raise awareness of this wonderful field as a career path. Secondly, you know, we want to ensure equity in our response activity, equity in our recovery efforts, and to truly serve all communities. And that really goes back to, you know, the people we engaged, the people that we engage in all facets of emergency management, the hires that we make, the folks that we recruit, right? Those all fall into, you know, making our field such a more robust, better, more inclusive, collaborative field to work with. And then lastly, engaging with those diverse partners, as I mentioned earlier. We really need to look at, you know, how we build strong strategic partners with the largest and most diverse groups as possible to help inform our planning, help inform our strategies around recovery and response, and certainly mitigation as well. So those are three takeaways that hopefully that folks will get from this discussion. As I said, I would be brief, and I want to spend more time on you know, answering any questions, fielding any questions from the audience. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bowman. You do have a few questions, so there is one question from Allison. The disproportionate effects are very apparent when a derecho came through her hometown in Cedar Rapids in 2020. They lost 60 to 75% of tree line. No one had cell service for 3 days, no power for an average of 3 weeks, or internet for longer. Gas was very difficult at all stores, ended up passing out food or throwing it out. But it became apparent when cleanup happened quickly for those who had access to trailers, chainsaws, and generators, and this dragged out for months for those who didn't. So that's just a comment going back to the inequities that exist that you were speaking of. So for another question here, or comment, Tyrus, for when the question and answer portion, in your experience, what have been some of the most significant obstacles to effective inclusion in this field?
So, I mean, really, when we're looking at, you know, the community level and being able to, you know, engage with constituents in the community, trust, you know, is a huge factor, you know, especially in, you know, polarizing political times where, you know, we might have individuals that need help that may be undocumented, that may feel that, you know, well, they need this help, but, you know, is asking for help going to be more detrimental to them, you know, considering that their status of not being documented, a documented citizen, right? So things like that, you know, the breaking down the barriers around trust in a lot of communities, you know, being able to connect with, you know, faith-based leaders, which tend to have their fingers on the pulse of their communities and the individuals they serve. So being able to break down, you know, barriers among, you know, among different groups, related to trust. Being from the government, there's an old saying, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. Really, no one really believes that. But as we build trust with our partners and start to build those partnerships, things will get, I feel things will get easier, right? Because you're having more people, more diverse thought into the process, and you're being inclusive, right? So that's what I see as being a major challenge around getting services to individuals is really the trust factor.
Thank you so much for answering that question. I just wanted to ask you 3 takeaways from your presentation.
Yeah, so the three takeaways is really what I kind of closed out with, right? The importance and criticality of having a diverse workforce, right? Because of all those reasons that that we kind of went through, right? The collaboration, the enhanced efficiency in those things, right? The second would really be the raising awareness of emergency management as a profession, so that we can have a more diverse pool of qualified individuals that are willing and able to perform this work, right? This work is rewarding. It's a career path that many times is maybe neglected or forgot about, but we're here. So a key takeaway there is if there are any people that looking to change careers or trying to determine a career path, and they may have considered public safety, law enforcement, and the like, I would steer them towards emergency management. And the third takeaway is really the importance of partnerships, right? And those partnerships are from everywhere. And those partnerships can be as diverse as the workforce that we seek to have, as diverse as the populations that we serve in our communities. And those partnerships should be reflective of the communities that we serve as emergency managers. So I would say those 3 things are the key takeaways from today's presentation.
And I also, just to add to that, the fact that you said about building trust is building those partnerships. So for example, that outreach to faith organizations, I think they're a trusted, like you mentioned, they're a trusted group, a trusted community. They speak different languages depending on what community they serve. And like you said, building that partnership with your faith organizations who already are trusted. I think that's also bridges the gap to at least helping us to have that outreach and that inclusion that so many of us, like I could speak to the city of Markham, we're one of the most diverse communities in Canada. And that's one of the things that we value, is that outreach to our community members, our faith leaders, our cultural groups, etc. So any other questions? I saw one here about professionalization of the EM field, having an increased amount of certifications to practice EM increases or reduces the barriers to entry for people from underrepresented communities. So having that professionalization and that the certification requirements, do you think it increases or reduces the barriers to have people in underrepresented communities, enter the field?
Well, I mean, I think, the first thing is really that awareness, that awareness piece, having folks be aware that, emergency management is a viable career path. Now, when you're looking at, professional certifications, the professional certification through the International Association of Emergency Managers, for example, the Certified Emergency Manager credential, certainly there are, degree requirements that are needed to sit for that exam. But to be a practicing emergency manager, at the local level, I would certainly look at some of those requirements, for various positions. I think the professionalization is beneficial to the field, and I think that as we continue to professionalize the organization, we do have to look at ways to bring, some of those, individuals that may not have those certifications or those degrees, but have those experience, help them, along the way, if they so desire, to move towards, the credentials and the degrees and all the pomp and circumstance around the profession. So I think it would be maybe a challenge to some, but I think overall it's a good thing for the profession. And if there are so many tools and resources out there, FEMA, for example, has a host of free classes, free training, from ICS and beyond. Travel to Emmitsburg, Maryland for various trainings, really at no cost, right? So you can get and build those skill sets, free of cost. As you're developing your career, as you're navigating, emergency management as a profession, and you're making those determinations, where do I want to go now? So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you so much. This goes into the next question, and I think it could bridge from the previous one, is, are you aware, both Brandy and Dr. Bowman, are you aware of any mentoring for higher level? Let's, for example, someone just said, for someone, a person of color, or even a neurodivergent person, emergency manager, looking to have that same person or someone similar mentor them, so that they could get higher level positions. Is there any mentoring available for someone who is neurodivergent in the EM field? I don't know. Or, with respect to the EM fields, for equity, diversity, inclusion, person of color, like, does something like that exist, or should something like that exist, like a database for people who could reach out to those who have achieved a higher level of job position to help support people through that?
I certainly think, you mentioned a database. I think that would be a great idea of kind of like, a clearinghouse of established emergency managers, people in the field that can connect with, up and coming emergency managers. I do sit on IAEM's Region 2's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And we work closely with, emergent leaders in emergency management that are also, members of the professional organization of IAM. But for me, I'm happy to work with anyone and mentor, and I've done mentoring for individuals. So I'm open to having those discussions. And if if I can guide someone to someone else that I know that they might connect better with, or that they, through my network, I will certainly, connect those dots for those individuals.
That's awesome. Thank you. There's a question for Brandy. Are there international standards or guidelines to support neurodiverse individuals in a professional environment regarding work accommodations?
There's not. That's where the law comes in. As far as international guidelines, there aren't any that I know of except for maybe like UN human rights. I'd have to go dig into it. In America, in North America, in the United States, of course, there's Americans with Disabilities Act, and there's some other legislation there to protect them. My personal opinion is it's good that they're protected, but I don't think that those laws are proactive enough, because it still puts the burden on the marginalized person or the neurodivergent person to out themselves to go ask for help, or to go ask for accommodations. And so that keeps people from doing it. That is a barrier in and of itself. I don't have a recommended solution there. I'm happy to talk about it and, advocate for policy changes. But as far as that goes, Americans with Disabilities Act in the United States, along with some other laws there, I'm not sure international, but there isn't really a standard. I mean, if there was a standard, all employers in the United States would be doing it right. So, it's even with the ADA. So no, there isn't out there that I know of.
Okay. Thanks so much. Just more work to do, Brandy. Just more work to do.
More work to do.
Dr. Bowman, there's a question for you. I'm just going to ask you, can you look at it and answer that? I just wanted to, again, open up more questions. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you, both speakers and Francesco for working with us and organizing all of this. I have to say that these sessions since September have been excellent, and it's just the beginning. Like we say, there's so much work to be done. When you look at the news, you see things like I was mentioning to both of you, the London Brigade report on harassment and bullying that was just released this week. There are things that we could celebrate. The New York mayor signs a bill to improve diversity within the fire department in New York City. So there are things that are being exposed around the world, which is good. It's the acknowledgement of a problem, and then ways in which to fix it. And I just wanted to say that from your presentations now, Brandy, I kind of took your ABCs of leveling the playing field. I love that. And the whole idea, acknowledge neurodivergency and ableist bias, bring stakeholders, the B, bring stakeholders to the table, which even relates to what Dr. Bowman said. It's making sure that we have our stakeholders at the table. It's all what we do in emergency management. And then create accessible inclusive environments. I found like that really, it wrapped up what you were saying, but also I love the fact that, neurodivergence is a superpower. And it really does align with a lot of the traits of emergency managers. So I could definitely relate. And Dr. Bowman, your presentation, you provided such an amazing overview of equity, diversity, and inclusion and considerations, especially to underserved communities and at-risk communities that I think when we're planning, we really do need to consider. And like you said, bring the people to the table, bring the stakeholders to the table. And the whole idea about raising awareness of EM as a career choice. Me, I am Indian, Asian. I'm a woman. So at the end of the day, when I do look around the table, still there needs to be some more changes. I have to say though, that I'm seeing a lot of women in the field, which is great and encouraging. I would like to see more people in leadership roles. Again,
I think that's a ticket right there. Once we get the diversity in the top levels, I think that's a good ticket to aim for.
Exactly. I think really leadership matters. And especially in the EOC too, when somebody's working in an emergency operations center, somebody who understands and appreciates neurodiversity, that makes a difference. And I could honestly say that working through COVID with a leader, our fire chief who understands that, he was checking in on us. We actually moved our EOC from that dungeon to a room that had light and windows because it was preferred and it changed the environment. And we were able to cope and to understand and recognize when people are feeling a little bit tired. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, Brandy, is about the masking. When should you realize that, you from your experience and your story, it went to the point where it had physical and mental impacts that required you hospitalization?
So
that to me is like taking it too far. Like what were your triggers that you didn't listen to, perhaps?
So I will tell you, I was just diagnosed as autistic last year at 42 years old. So wow. Prior to that diagnosis, I knew that I had ADHD. I knew about the CPTSD, and all of my symptoms were all tied back to the PTSD for a long time. And women are historically and over undiagnosed. So they'll go through every gamut in the book before they get to autism, usually in women. But really what it took was the hospitalization, and I knew that I'm the kind of person that I would keep working until I fell over, right? But I knew that that was not safe for the citizens that I was serving. And that is really what it took that mindset to go, look, you can do this until you fall over and collapse, but me are really affecting other people's lives if you don't step back. Like, you can't do a good job if you don't put your own oxygen mask on first. And so that's really kind of, that realization is what made me take the step back and go, okay, I'm going to move to, a part of the profession that gives me more autonomy. And it also let me focus on law school, because that is no walk in the park at all. And then COVID hit. So I ended up working COVID while going to law school. So it really was all a wash. But that's really what it took, was that recognition that if I didn't care for myself, A, I could cost somebody else their life, and B, I wouldn't be around long enough to make the changes that I wanted to make.
Thank you. I think it's important to, like you said, to recognize that you are neurodivergent, and your triggers. For example, just those stories that you told resonated with me. It's being out there and putting on that mask, making sure that you're presenting yourself like I am right now. But at the end of this, I'm going to be quiet in my little corner, because that's what I need for myself. And I think as emergency managers, we also need to do that, the self-care.
The self-care. And, I hear a lot, well, you don't look autistic, or you're a great people person. Like, what do you mean you're an introvert? And I think It's really important. Believe people when they tell you something. What you see might be a magic eye poster.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't see anything in that poster, by the way.
I
saw nothing.
It could be nothing, but I just Googled.
It just looked like a pretty picture.
Yes.
I was looking for the T-Rex. I couldn't find it.
Me too. Absolutely. So again, any more questions? Francesco, I don't know if we're early. So it's up to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, clearly I hit the raise my hand button. Sorry about that. There's a slight delay on my computer. I wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Dr. Bowman had answered earlier regarding the credentialing and the professionalism. As somebody who recently took the bar exam, also a 0 out of 10, don't recommend. I agree, Dr. Bowman, with what you said about the need for the professionalism and the credentialing, because with that comes awareness, and with that comes money, and with that comes advocacy and lobbying. On the flip side to that, I think it's also any sort of exams or tests or any sort of requirement that things be done a certain way, I think can get a little dangerous. Like, for instance, the bar exam is the bar exam. You can get accommodations and maybe a little bit of extra time, but that's about it. But exams and certain credentialing processes, in my mind, mean that you're great at taking a test. They're not made for my brain, and they're not made by people with brains like mine. So I think as we move towards the credentialing and the professionalism, I think it's needed so that the profession needs the money and the awareness. But I definitely think there needs to be diversity at the top in making those decisions, so that it's not just a very narrow viewpoint. Otherwise, you're, invariably going to discriminate against someone.
And taking that further, even the hiring process too, like presentations or the interview process, it definitely narrows the field for those who aren't comfortable in those environments too. So
absolutely.
I'm
a firm believer that like names, years, dates, like resumes and hiring processes really should be like blind panels, scrub it all. But at the same time, I also think there needs to be an element of what opportunities has that person been exposed to. They might have just as many credentials, or not as many, but not had the opportunity either. So I feel like we need to do better all the way around in those evaluations.
I think, again, the steps to doing better is having these types of forums, seminars. And like I said, I think that what CIFAL York is doing, the series of seminars here just started the conversation, and I hope it continues. And I appreciate the opportunity to moderate and meet such wonderful people. And in terms of contact information, I'm sure you guys are on LinkedIn, et cetera. So people could reach out to you and move forward that way.
Please do, absolutely.
Please do. And Dr. Bowman, I'm sorry, I saw you at IAEM, but it didn't dawn on me that it was you.
Yeah, I thought I saw you too. I mean, and after we connected on LinkedIn, I was like, yeah, I'm sure I saw you there. So
yes,
it's in your backyard. So it was great.
I literally live right on the other side of the river, so I just had to like grab the boat.
Well, thank you both, and this was excellent.
Sonia, I appreciate it.
Take care. And Francesco?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Dr. Bowman and Brandy, for those great presentations and for answering all of the questions. I think it was super informative. I think it was a great way to wrap up the last session of the series. And thank you, Sonia, again for moderating and for going through all the questions.
Question, what's next for this? What's going to happen next?
Nicely done, Sonia. That's great.
Great segue.
I'm not sure what our next steps are. Hopefully we can do some sort of analysis on the series itself and maybe produce some something in writing and maybe continue the series at another date, like an updated series or just a continuation of the series next year maybe. So yeah, there's a lot of options. We're just kind of saying what the best route to take, and maybe it'll be a combination of everything, or we'll do everything with it. But yeah, I don't think that this is going to end with just the series, and I certainly hope it doesn't, because it is a really big topic, and it is a really important topic as we move forward in the profession. So yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you for moderating. And no, for sure. No, like I said, I do hope that we can keep going forward with this topic, and either as another series or something like more formal as an article or an analysis. And yeah, so thank you again to everybody for presenting. Thank you for moderating, Sonia. Thank you to everybody in the
Take care. Happy holidays.
Yes, and Francesco, thank you for the 5,000 emails back and forth in the last few months.
Absolutely, Francesco. Thank you so much for all the work that you've put in. And this has been I followed the series. It's been a great series. So great work.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll all stay in touch, and thank you so much for everything today. And thank you again to everyone for participating, asking questions. Everyone in the audience, we do this and all for everybody to learn. So I hope everybody has taken away a lot from the series.
Very cool.
So with that, I will stop the recording.